Good morning, all. Welcome to the session on Nudge to Net Zero, helping homeowners create warmer and healthier homes. My name is Davinda Jammers, and I head up the Market and Insights function at Trustmark. Before we do a deep dive into the session itself, just an opportunity to share with you insights on who Trustmark is. We are an independent, not-for-profit organisation delivering an quality mark of quality for home improvements and customer protection that homeowners and occupiers can recognise and trust. We are the only government endorsed scheme for home improvements. And so, how do we operate? Well, there are four principal cornerstones to the organisation. We drive registration through our membership. We drive assurance and quality of work through independent audits. Principal aim is to provide customer protection through dispute resolution support and an independent ombudsman's body, and also driving insights through data technology and through the data warehouse and products and services that we hold. So the types of trades that we cover, this is not just about driving energy efficiency in homes, but the wider home improvements products and services ranging from roofers, bathroom specialists to landscape gardening. So hopefully that gives you a bit of context of who we are. And as to sort of why the focus on driving behavioural change within the industry. So through the last 6 months or so, and the conversations I've been having with a breadth of businesses across different sectors, we're all very much talking about driving behavioural change. But what does that actually mean? And whether that's through the different types of financial products and services, or what customers are actually seeing on the front line as well. We are very much sort of talking very much at a sort of a general level, but today was an opportunity to bring an eminent group of panelists to really get into the skin of the subject matter itself. So without further ado, let me hand over to the chair for the session, Anna Harper. Anna is CEO of Green Resi and a principal residential author as well. Anna, over to you.
Thank you so much, Davinda. Hello, everybody. Very warm welcome. It is a pleasure to be here. I am particularly excited to be part of this conversation because I think it's really important how we can help homeowners to create warmer, healthier and more sustainable homes. So as Davinda said, for those who don't know me, I'm Anna Claire Harper. I'm a co-founder of Green Resi, and we focus on helping investors to make smart, sustainable decisions about individual properties. I've worked with corporates like Deloitte and Knight Frank on the one hand, and I've worked with private investors on 300 or so property transactions on the other. Currently, I'm working with investors on about 300 million of homes under management, many of which require retrofits. I host the Return Property and Investment podcast, where I get to share insights from leaders in the field, and I write a property column for The Telegraph. I also run the Cambridge University Land Society's Residential Forum, and ultimately all of this is about the same theme that we're covering today, which is something I care really deeply about: arming people with the information and the tools that they need to make easier, smarter, more sustainable decisions, which is, as we know, critical in the transition to net zero. So wherever you signed up for this webinar from, on the path to a greener future, you'll know that one of the biggest challenges is the lack of meaningful behaviour change amongst homeowners. And housing plays a massive role in the UK's carbon footprint. We know that more than half of UK homes are energy inefficient, with EPC ratings of D or below contributing to higher household emissions and energy bills, but also the very unfortunate title of the UK having the leakiest homes in Europe. The good news is that there is appetite for change, but this webinar is about the very problem and opportunity, I suppose, that we face, which is, a lot of businesses aren't confident in how they can encourage action and make eco upgrades compelling and accessible to homeowners. So our plan for today is to share some practical ideas that you can take away and help the homeowners that you work with to make lasting energy saving changes. And this touches on demystifying retrofit, it touches on simplifying the finance, and also about motivating behavioural change that actually lasts. One quick example before we get going Although we called the webinar Nudge to Net Zero, in general, we try to avoid talking about net zero and retrofit with consumers, and instead we recommend language focused on the desires of households. So it's things like warmer, healthier homes, more comfortable, better sound insulation, better soundproofing, and the emphasis is on cost and payback for them. For example, payback within 12 months rather than carbon emissions as a priority. Before we dive in, final housekeeping note is that this session is being recorded, but don't worry, you are not. And now I will walk you through the agenda. So we'll start with an introduction to how to encourage sustainable home improvements from Katie King, who is a specialist in behavioural economics. She's going to share insights from her work with the Behavioural Insights team, also known as the Nudge Unit, and Nesta, and even her own studies in psychology. I'll then introduce our panelists who will offer their perspectives on overcoming those barriers and catalysing retrofit. I've prepared some questions which I want to have answered, but we'd also really love to have your questions. So please do send them in at any point through the webinar, but especially when you feel inspired to do so. The more questions from you, the merrier this will be. And finally, I'll summarise the key takeaways and then hand over to Davinder to cover off the next steps. We're going to do all of that before 10 a.m. So we're in for a wild ride. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Katie King from Nesta to set the stage with her expertise on the practical strategies for nudging homeowners towards sustainable change. Katie.
Thanks, Anna. Right, I'm going to take control of the slides and take you through. Right, Nudge to Net Zero. Here we go. So, hi, I'm Katie. I'm from Nesta. I'm Deputy Director of our Sustainable Future mission. If you haven't come across Nesta before, we're the UK's innovation agency for social good. So we design, test and scale new solutions to society's biggest problems. And we've been doing that for about 20 years. Our Sustainable Future mission is very much focused on home decarbonisation or green home upgrades, or I guess like we're about to talk about with consumers, talking about healthier, warmer and more comfortable homes. I'm going to start by talking about the barriers to behaviour change, and I'm going to use the COM-B model, which essentially stands for capability, opportunity, motivation, and then behaviour. So I'll go through each one and the barriers, and then I'll talk about how we can overcome those barriers. So firstly, the capability barriers can be that people just aren't aware of what they could do or the grants available. I'm always really surprised how few people are aware of what's out there. And I'm sure we'll talk a bit more about that with some of the other panelists. Cognitive skills, sometimes people lack the financial literacy. And particularly when we're talking about things like payback period or interest rates, it can turn quite a lot of people off. And finally, there could just be too many options to choose from. I experience this all the time where people will give you so many options. By the end, you're just a bit confused. And I think that can sometimes happen when people are talking about something like home upgrades, that there is often a lot to choose from. Then opportunity, people might lack the resources and the time, of course, the fact that many of these things are high cost. And also, I think we sometimes don't think about the headspace people might have, you know, if they've got busy lives, multiple jobs, families, elderly parents, all these things might mean that they don't necessarily feel like they have the headspace and the time to engage, or it's whether they want to, I guess, to some extent, but also whether they really do. Some people practically really don't have the time. They also might not sort of have those opportunities in the environment. So even though they do want to do something, they might struggle to find an installer. Or maybe they're working with an architect or a builder who's not familiar with certain measures. So they might say, oh, I'd quite like to get a heat pump, an air source heat pump, but the builder or the architect isn't fully confident or isn't sure it's the right solution, so won't necessarily be able to encourage it. And so the environment isn't helping them. And then finally on this one, sometimes these home upgrades are quite low visibility. People don't necessarily know their neighbour have their loft insulated, for example. And so you might not be aware of the kind of cultural, social norms that actually a lot of people have insulated their loft recently, but it's not necessarily the kind of thing you might be talking about at a dinner party. Well, unless you're me, because I'm always talking about home retrofit at dinner parties. And then finally, the behavioural barriers. So these are just a few. There are lots, but I think some of the key ones are people might not really perceive there to be a benefit. So sometimes, misguidedly, sometimes they might think that it won't particularly lower bills, or that they won't notice a difference in the warmth or comfort of their home. They also might have some beliefs about, the consequences could be bad. So, maybe they've read things in the news about people getting insulation that they, has not been done properly, or they've had problems selling the property. So all that might create some emotions, which is the second one. They might lack consumer trust, be a bit fearful, have that risk aversion, and be like, it's better to do nothing than to do something that might go wrong. And finally, here, goals. Everyone's got different goals that they want to achieve in life, and it might be a lower priority for them to do these kind of upgrades compared to, say, a new kitchen or a new bathroom. And obviously everyone's got a budget. So we've talked through, these are all the reasons, or some of the top reasons why people might not, or things that might get in the way of them taking action. So now I'm going to talk you through, this is the framework we use at Behavioural Insights team. So this is thinking about, if you want someone to do something, you've got to make it easy, attractive, social and timely. And I'll talk you through a few examples. So make it easy. Some of these, I know they're really simple, and you might think I already do that, but keeping information super simple, potentially thinking about a reading age of about 8. That's the same as, The Sun or similar publications. You can use online websites where you can put in your text and see what reading age it says, and then you can adapt it to try and make it easier. One thing that you see it all the time, people saying you've got 3 options, but this one is the most popular, and that does really help people to make a choice. And also saying things like the best use of your budget is, and just giving them one sort of headline option, and then saying we can talk about other things if you want, but it really reduces that mental load of like too many choices. Similarly, clear next steps. The number of times I've spoken to someone and afterwards I think, I actually don't know what I need to do to make this happen. Like what is the next step? And just being really clear. If you want to go ahead, send me an email, or here's my phone number, or just being really, really clear. I can start on this date. Do you want to start on that day? Like being really concrete and letting people know that that's what they need to do to say yes. Finally, we just had some great planning rule changes for air source heat pumps. So letting customers know that they don't need planning permission anymore. You're making it easy for them. You're telling them that actually things have changed, the rules have been freed up. That's the kind of thing that previously there were barriers. Now it's a bit easier. We should let people know. And finally, partnerships with others to offer multiple measures. I hear this a lot where consumers want everything. They want to do it as one big work. They want EV charging, they want a battery, PV, air source heat pump. And often they're frustrated that they can't find one supplier. So although maybe not the most straightforward, there's something to think about there. How can you offer or team up with others to offer more of a holistic experience? And finally, a plug for Nesta's Get a Heat Pump website, which is an example of this. Really simple advice, really clear. We have a quiz, just to say this is supported by MCS Foundation, and Energy Saving Trust. Please do share it with your customers, but it's got a really simple quiz about what type of heat pump is right for you. And again, it's just keep making the options simple, clear language, and we've got some case studies as well that can help people to see what others have done. So how do we make it attractive? Well, we've already talked about the fact there are grants, there are financial products, and we'll talk about this more. But I think so many people are not aware, particularly mortgage customers, have access to these cash rewards. And they go up to £2,000 for Halifax and Barclays for an air source heat pump. That's something that is definitely worth mentioning to customers. And then tailoring your energy saving figures. Anna talked about payback. The loft installation now has really impressive payback time. And that's the kind of thing that you on an Energy Saving Trust website, but it's all publicly available, so you can pull that for the kind of home that they have. And then also emphasising the non-financial benefits of insulation and heat pumps. We're certainly aware that people really do value warmth, coziness, and the acoustic benefits as well of insulation. So that's something to mention as well. And I'll come on to it, but potentially visiting others that have had these things done and seeing it for themselves. And finally, obviously, adding your trust mark or other badges to your website and email signatures can help people feel the comfort that it is a good idea to go forward. So I'll talk about making things social. And yeah, I just talked about this, the idea that you can see other people's home upgrades. Firstly, I think something that's underutilized in this space is signage. Like we see it all the time with builders' loft extensions, but it's rare to see a sign that says a heat pump's being installed here or loft insulation's being installed here. And I think that's something that can really signal to neighbours as well that something's happening and, you know, get your brand out there. And then again, plugging a Nesta product, we've got Visit a Heat Pump, which is a website that there are over 400 locations where a consumer can find a heat pump to look at. We've had over 700 visits so far, and installers can create their own profile, and then you can get your logo next to your listings, and you can essentially promote your installs and send your customers a link that has all of your installs that people can go and visit. We find it's been super impactful for helping people get over the line with some technology that they might be unsure about. And yeah, this is just an example of if you create your own profile, you can have your logo and contact details on the site, and you can list and have a bespoke link to all your installs. And then finally, timely. So how do you make it timely? I think I've previously mentioned working with other trades and offering green home upgrades at time of other works, but I think particularly in my own experience, when I was using a floor layer, they said to me, do you want insulation? And it was the perfect time because I just had all my floorboards taken up. And similarly with plasterers, I wish a plasterer had said to me, do you want some internal wall insulation on these external walls? But I didn't think of it, and I wasn't really aware of it at the time. And once I've plastered and put up dado rails and skirting boards, the last thing I want to do is take them back up again. And architects, of course. The architect I used didn't mention at all the idea that I could get green heating. He put in that boiler on the plans, and I didn't even think to question it. And finally, perhaps asking people when they're remortgaging, because if they're not ready now, you can make a record of it in your diary and get in contact with them when they are remortgaging, and remind them of your proposal, remind them of the quote, and say, you know, there are now lots of ways that you can finance things through remortgaging. And I think that's it from me. So yeah, really looking forward to your questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Katie. And Reese, if we could whiz back to the people slide, that would be amazing. That was fascinating. So the next thing is for me to introduce, thank you so much, Reese, the rest of our expert panel. Each will bring unique perspectives on driving consumer action in retrofit. So alongside Katie, who has introduced herself already, our panelists will now give a quick 2-minute summary of who they are, what they do, and perhaps, if time allows, a quick insight on this topic from their current role or experience so far. So if we could start with you, Emma, that would be wonderful.
Morning all, so lovely to be here today. Emma Harvey-Smith, I'm Chief of Staff at the Green Finance Institute, but previously led the Green Finance Institute's Built Environment Programme, which worked with financial institutions and with industry to develop new financial solutions that could support investment into decarbonising homes. Before joining the Green Finance Institute, I used to work in the finance sector, where I led the launch of one of the UK's first green mortgage products.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Emma. Chris, also in the finance realm, would you introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks first of all for the invite, and great to see so many people here. So I think between myself and Emma, we can cover off what the financial sector are doing, and I can show a bit more about what NatWest are doing, hopefully without it sounding too much like an advert. A bit of context about NatWest, you know, you might think it's a big bank and that's it, but obviously we're heavily involved in this industry. We are big lenders to the construction and new build firms, small firms, joiners, plumbers, We're also the biggest lender to social housing, and a lot of the things that you see perhaps in your local area. I know in my area, there's lots of external wall insulation going up and solar panels, so things like that we finance too. And also we've got 1.3 million mortgage customers, who we try and help. Now, my job is lead on climate propositions and insights for our personal customers. And because most emissions come from the homes, primarily that's where my job is focused on. We're trying to help our customers understand their home a bit more, understand the energy efficiency capabilities that they can avail themselves of, and try and put them in touch with trusted traders, because we know that's one of the problems that homeowners have. They don't know where to go and where to turn to. So that's a bit more about me and what I do.
Thank you so much, Chris. Yes, and I think some of those topics have already been mentioned in the chat, which I'm keeping an eye on. Mark, would you introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. Thank you very much. Good morning, all. My name is Mark Fowles from Elevate. We are a family-run building company based in Reading, and we do retrofit various different technologies into existing homes in order to improve the quality of the air that you breathe in that home and the way that the home performs. I've worked in the construction industry for 41 years, and I've bared witness to the way houses have been built over the years. Obviously, years ago, when houses were first built, this wasn't really a topic of conversation, and houses were very leaky. The windows were leaky. There wasn't very much insulation, but the house breathed really, really well. These days, we put in central heating, double glazing, we close all the gaps, and we can sometimes have unintentional consequences of the house sweating, where you get interstitial condensation, where the dew point meets somewhere in the wall or the roof, and then that can cause condensation. So it's important that you speak to a professional when you're retrofitting something like internal wall insulation, so that you get it right and you get the dew point right, and we can certainly help you with that. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mark. Well, actually, I think let's start with a question for you, Mark, because when we think about retrofit, there are, as Katie highlighted, so many different options. So, Mark, I wondered if you can share what retrofit measures are the simplest, easiest, and most cost-effective for consumers. How do they get bang for their buck?
Okay, so number one is always draft proofing. If you live in quite an old Georgian or Victorian house, you probably might have a house perhaps that's historically listed, so it might be grade 2 listed, so you're quite restricted to what you can do with that house. So the first thing is draft proofing. There's lots of things on the market today where you can add draft proofing to existing windows and doors. When you think about a front door, you've got a great big letter plate, and the only thing that's stopping that cold air from coming in the winter is a very thin piece of brass on the front. So there are other letter plates, for example, you can fit to a front door, which includes some insulation and stop that cold bridging coming in through the front door. The other quick gain is loft insulation. I go into so many lofts these days, and when that house was built, there's a little bit of insulation, probably about 50 millimeters thick. It's not doing very much at all. Or quite often I go into a loft that actually has the requisite thickness of insulation, which is 300 millimeters. And what the client's done is they need some storage. So what they've done is they put chipboard and they've squashed all that insulation down and pretty much made it ineffective. It's really important that the insulation in a loft is really fluffy, because that's what allows it to retain the heat in the room. So most loft insulation projects we do have a payback within 2 years, 18 months sometimes. So that's a really, really quick gain. And obviously loft draft proofing is also a quick gain. So it's just a case of identifying those holes in your house, whether it be windows, doors, chimney stacks. Chimney stacks do need to be ventilated, but the ways of ventilating it without losing too much of the warmth from inside the house. So that are the easy gains, and then you start going on to MVHR, which is mechanical ventilation heat recovery, which is the next one up. It takes a little bit longer on the payback for those. But the main thing with mechanical venting and heat recovery is that what you want to do is close up all the gaps, and then you want to force air in, so you've got nice fresh air coming in. The air that goes out, this little magic box basically retains a lot of the heat that's going out of the house. So if you've got 21 degrees inside the house, it's 2 degrees outside, it's bringing cold fresh air in, but the little box just warms that heat up a little bit. So then you're only heating from about 8 degrees to 21 to get that ambient temperature in the house. So that's kind of like the very first three of the stage. And then from that point, then you can have HVAC, which is heat, ventilation and air conditioning, which is a little bit more expensive. And obviously you've got double glazing, solar PV, and then air source heat pumps. And, you know, it depends on the orientation of your roof, whether or not solar PV will work. So it's a case of speaking to the professionals, making an appointment, and having somebody come round, having a look at your property, discussing how you live in your house, and then they can recommend the best technology for you and your house.
Fantastic. That was really helpful. Thank you, Mark. And Emma, we'll go back to you. One of the most significant barriers to home retrofit is money. There's been a couple of comments in the chat about money, which is clearly a huge barrier. How are major banks helping support homeowners in their journey to make their homes more energy efficient?
Well, you know, the finance sector has actually been offering green home finance for several decades. Ecology Building Society has been offering green mortgages for many decades. So these solutions have been around for a while, but we really started to see financial institutions start to explore how they could support their customers back in about 2019, 2020, when Barclays launched their Green Home Mortgage. We also saw the launch of the Green Finance Institute's Green Home Finance Principles, but we also saw the release by the UK government of the Energy Performance Certificate, the EPC data. So mortgage banks were able to actually assess the energy efficiency of the properties sitting on their books, and were able to actually see that, you know, in most cases, a vast majority of them were pretty inefficient. And so, you know, what have we seen? So since 2018, the green mortgage market, which is the main source of green home finance at the moment, has grown from 4 products to over 60 products today. And these products really vary in terms of how they support customers and the incentives they provide. So some offer incentives to buy an already energy efficient home. That's sometimes a lower interest rate, higher borrowing capacity, the cashback, or a free energy efficiency report. And some of those products are increasingly looking less at how you buy an already energy efficient home, but more importantly, how do you improve the energy efficiency of that property? So again, we're starting to see some of these retrofitting loans being developed, again with various different incentives, from changing interest rates through to cashbacks as well. We've also seen, though, that lenders are starting to partner with organisations that can provide the kind of advice and support that Mark was just talking about there, which is actually really important. So we know that some lenders are offering building renovation passports, others have developed their own one-stop shops, and some are offering free home surveys when you take out a mortgage. So really trying to bring the awareness sort of side of consumers up the scale, and then being able to provide the finance to help their customers at the point of need. I think it's quite important to point out, though, that finance is not going to drive the energy efficiency agenda overall. Finance is a facilitator. It helps you get something done, but nobody wakes up in the morning saying, I want a mortgage. You wake up saying, I want a new home. Likewise, you don't wake up saying you want a green mortgage. You wake up saying, it's really cold today, I'd like to retrofit my home. So actually, finance is a facilitator, but the enablers of this retrofitting requires policy, building up the supply chain, customer advice, etc., which we'll obviously touch on throughout the rest of this webinar.
That's super helpful. Thank you, Emma. You're completely right. Yeah, no one wakes up saying, I want a new mortgage today, for sure. And Chris, also on the theme of finance, what have you and other lenders learned from your attempts to catalyse change, which others can learn from?
Thanks. Good question. I think we're learning all the time, probably. I think from our own research, we understand that homeowners in particular, that we're interested in, they do want to do their bit from an environment perspective. They do want to reduce their emissions, but we also know that it's the pocket part rather than the planet part that's the greatest impact in terms of our message, because we've done this research. We understand a bit more about what customers and what our homeowners are looking for. We know that awareness is an issue and a problem. I know that Katie mentioned that earlier on. We also know that homeowners don't know where to start, and they don't know in what order to do the work. They don't know who to trust. And one of the things that we've done to try and learn a bit more was we retrofitted 9 homes in the UK. So between ourselves and our coalition partners, we spotted 9 NatWest customers who had a low energy efficient home, and we fully retrofitted, their home. So this was taking, older, leakier homes and putting them straight, as far as we could take them. So that could mean things like external wall insulation, an air source heat pump, solar panels, radiators, insulation, heating controls. So we've done all of that to try and understand a bit more, also from a first-hand perspective, what that journey could be like, and that was really insightful. And one of the things that we did as part of that, we built our own home energy hub. So it's like a one-stop shop area where, homeowners in the UK, not just NatWest customers, can go and access all this information. So you can get tools like a digital home improvement plan. You can put your postcode in and it give you recommendations as to what your home is likely to be like. It pulls in information from publicly available information like how many bedrooms you've got, how old your property is. It then makes an assessment about your property and gives you a recommendation. One of the things that we've also found in terms of our learnings through our Home Energy Hub is the biggest and most visited part is our grants finder. So we've got a partner called Snug who help us with this. And of all the things that we offer in this, the grants part is by far the biggest, the biggest element of visits. So we know that customers are interested, from our research. We know that they want to do the work. We know that they're interested as much as to visit the hub, but they're not doing so much work just now. And that's the thing the learning is. The learning is they're not doing the work as much as we maybe want them to do. And we know they're looking at grants. So it looks to be that customers and homeowners want to do the work, but they're keeping an eye out for grants. They're keeping an eye out for money off. And this is where I think sometimes the finance industry can help. I think, Katie, you mentioned that some of the lenders are doing cashbacks. It's worthwhile, trying to find out, who does these things if you've got a mortgage there. And also, as part of our size and as part of this coalition with British Gas and Worcester Bosch and Advice, we can go and make our voice heard at government too. So we've got like lobbying, in government areas. We're asking for things like stamp duty change, public information campaigns, EPC reform. And we know the government is actively engaging. We talked to the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero, and we know they're listening. So I think that's the learning for us, is that customers want to make the change. They're looking at grants, and we're actively, talking to government to try and understand what more that they can do and what more we can do to try and help move that on a bit more.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. That's really, really helpful. And actually, as you said, we are being listened to if we make good points, and that is sort of an encouragement, I guess, to leave your comments, however critical or positive, in the chat, because the panelists here are influencers in this space. If anyone can make change happen, it's these. So please do keep your comments, positive or negative, coming. Katie, can you share some of your favourite examples of nudges that have worked effectively in encouraging homeowners to invest in energy efficiency?
Sure. So one example from the Behavioural Insights team was people were offered loft clearance as well as loft installation. And I think this really makes that point about making it easy. I know when I think about what's in my loft, the idea of taking it all out is not appealing. And so the idea that you could offer both services together and help people remove everything, and then maybe even, actually help them get rid of some of their stuff, I think is a great example. I know that there are also multiple times I've been involved in projects where we found that really when you're promoting whether people should do things or not, it is the finance that makes the difference in terms of putting it front and center, the benefits people can get. So, for example, if there are grants, like making it really clear that there are grants and making the amounts really clear. I know that when I worked with government, we found promoting all of their any kind of reward scheme or grants, that really it's the headline number of like the amount you could save, the amount of money you could get off. That's what really motivates people to take action. And I think at the moment, one of the challenges with the Great British Insulation Scheme is how much money you'd get off is only something you find out later. So if you can share whether people have been pre-approved or they would be eligible for this, I think that can really help as well.
Super helpful. Thank you, Katie. And Mark, I'd love to bring you in on this idea of kind of helping consumers to navigate what are the easiest, most quickly, the next recommended steps. So how, on a practical level, can people work out what the right thing is for their home, their situation, their lifestyle, with or without calling an expert in?
I think it's the heat loss is the sort of first criteria, is how quickly is heat escaping from your home. So as I said before, the quick fixes are draft proofing and loft insulation. Certainly not the spray foam insulation that a lot of houses have had in the past, because that has a whole new set of unintended consequences, like lenders not lending against homes that have that kind of spray insulation on the underside of the roof. So there are some pitfalls. There are certainly some things to avoid. That's the easy ones that homeowners can do themselves. As I said before, you need to make sure that you've got 300 millimeters of insulation. The first 150 mil will follow the direction of the joists, and the other 150 mil will oppose the direction of the joists, so you don't get any cold bridging. And it has to remain fluffy. If you do want to use your loft for storage, there's little feet you can get that sit over the joists with a little disc on the top. And so you've got a raised decking then. So you've still got your 300 mil of insulation between your first floor ceiling or your second floor ceiling and your loft space. But you can have all of that lovely storage that doesn't affect it. So they're the really, really easy ones. From that point, you really need to speak to a professional about what would suit that particular home. Quite a few years ago, we were doing a job in Twickenham, and the architect had specified an internal insulation product that was just stuck to the walls. And I didn't know anything about interstitial condensation then. We done that, finished the project on the Friday. Everything was lovely, looked amazing. And then we got a call over the weekend and went back to the project on the Monday, and the walls were weeping on the inside. The dew point was the plaster on the inside of the house. So we very quickly had to fit a ventilation system, and actually everything disappeared within 3 days, and the home was performing perfectly. So it's the unintentional consequences that I don't want to put people off about, but they're the ones that you need to speak to professionals about to make sure you understand things like not using the spray foam on the underside of a roof, and things like learning where the dew point is going to be in a wall or a roof, so that you can make sure you're using the right product. Basically, I mean, a really good example is sheep's wool. Now, sheep's wool is about 10 times as much as rock wool. I don't know why, because to create rock wool, you're heating stone up to such a high degree that it starts to flake off. And that's how rock wool pretty much is made. Whereas sheep's wool, you just shear a sheep, but I guess supply and demand. The great thing about sheep's wool is that it retains the moisture when the surrounding atmosphere is quite moist. And then when everything dries out, it releases it naturally. So it's a fantastic natural product. Unfortunately, it's 10 times as much as rock wool. So that are kind of pitfalls and the sort of recommendations I would make for homeowners that they can do now. If they've got a bit more of a budget and they want their home to improve even more, then that'd be the time to speak to a professional.
It's really helpful, Mark. And it's helpful because for a lot of us, everybody lives in a home. So we're consumers and professionals in whatever capacity we're in. I would think that many of the people who have signed up for this webinar are, but we'll hear from you in a minute. We've got one more minute of my questions and then we're moving on to yours. So Mark, actually, can I come back to you, which is just to help us diagnose it for business owners who are helping consumers in this space, how can they help consumers to do that thing that Katie described earlier, which is like pointing consumers in the direction of like the next right thing to do?
I think business owners, so the business owners that I engage with most of the time are architects. So I think if an architect is creating a design that's going to extend a house, a loft conversion, or whatever it is, I think they should do a whole look at the whole house, and as well as designing that extension, whether it's single story or 2-story or whatever, is do a SAP calculation of the existing home and look at areas where that homeowner can then improve the performance of the house. because it's great. I mean, we build a fantastic extension. All the insulation is up to current regulations. So that part of the house performs really, really well. But what about the rest of the house? That ground floor extension probably only represents about 15%, 20% of the floor space. What about the other 80% of the floor space? How is that part of the house or the home or any building performing? So I think it's important that we look at the whole property rather than just the one part of the property that we're working on. And if architects were going to bring that kind of part of into the equation as well, I think that would be a really good lead for our customers to say, right, okay, so this is the house, this is the extension, but we've got some recommendations here from the architect that are really going to improve how the house works, and then engaging with them on what the costs of them are, what the payback time will be on those items, and then kind of just prioritizing them with the client according to their budget. Their main criteria may be the payback time. They may say, I'm not buying anything that's not going to have a payback time longer than 5 years because we only intend to live here for 5 years. So if the payback time is 10 years and they intend to sell the house in 4 years' time, they're going to question whether or not it's a good return on their investment. So there's a few little things that play into that kind of conversation and how that conversation is determined. But that would be my job, certainly, as the contractor, to help the client prioritize, discuss the biggest gains, but give them the whole picture of what could be added to that property to improve its performance.
Fantastic, thank you, Mark. Okay, so now thank you very much everyone for indulging me in having my questions answered. It's over to you. I obviously have to read out Matthew Alcock's question first, which is, why is sheep's wool so expensive? And he's answered it by saying it's balmy.
Love that.
Thank you very much, Matthew. I just want to come back to the very top where Louise Banks had asked about scammers and trust. So I'm going to hand over to Chris now, because I feel like you have a good level of expertise and can help us to navigate, how can essentially homeowners feel confident in selecting the right both product and funding options in the context of, actually historically we've had quite a lot of scammers in this space, and then we might turn over as well later to Emma in her role as within Trustmark to talk about that as well. So Chris, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. I think probably having a mark in your life would be quite good. I don't think many people will know who are quite as knowledgeable as Mark, but I think if you've got a good mechanic or a good joiner and now a good home energy assessment expert, it would be a good idea. Most people don't, so I think that's what the issue is. One of the things that we've done, and I think other lenders are doing these things too, one of the things that we really recommend is, because we are a bank and we're not an expert, we've surrounded ourselves with experts so that we can understand this more and be a bit more credible, because you wouldn't naturally look to your bank for help on this. I mentioned before that we built this home energy hub. One of the parts of that is this one-stop shop where you can go to recognised experts. And one of the things that we've done in there is we've got a discounted in-home assessment. Now, I mentioned before that was sound like a NatWest advert. Some other lenders are doing similar things, but recommend you get an in-home assessment by a full qualified assessor, and they would do the types of things that Mark has suggested. They would assess your full home, give you proper recommendations, bespoke recommendations. The ones that we use, Vibrant, they'll then project manage and get quotes and things like that as well. So it means that you're going to an independent expert, you're getting expert advice, and you can go down that route. One of the things that we've done to help provide confidence, because we know that customers don't know where to go, is within our one-stop shop, we've got 2 or 3 different options for assessors, all with guaranteed types of work. So if you want to do it yourself and you're comfortable with that, we've got like a DIY expert there. British Gas, if you wanted to have the comfort of a big installer, and also Trustmark, today's hosts the only government approved place to get work done in the house, and that's all. If you wanted to go to like a local installer, maybe get it a bit cheaper, then you could go there too. So I think what we've tried to do is understand that, first of all, people who come to the bank, they'll know that we are not the experts and we're not trying to be an expert. So we're trying to provide confidence to our customers that we've gotten those experts. We've created it for you, and if you come to our environment, then we'll help you out not understanding what to do and in what order.
Thank you, Chris. Emma, is there anything you want to add in relation to Trustmark on that?
Just broader points, and kind of echoing exactly what Chris said. We do need these quality marks that give consumers confidence that the installers that they're using, that the tradespeople they're using, are competent and are high quality. Obviously Trustmark being one of the leading ones, MCS another for some of the micro generation technologies. But I think there's a big piece to say here as well around avoiding that split incentive. We've seen in the US, for example, where you have installers working and providing, for example, advising people on how to finance their projects, and actually that can end up with them falsely over accounting for how big the project needs to be, so that people take out more finance than required. And again, having that independence of your retrofit assessor, who's not going to be having further opportunities at the back of it, is not going to be doing the installations, is really important, because you get the right project for the building, and then they'll put you in touch with sort of trusted installers who can then undertake that. So I think we've seen where it's gone wrong in the US, and we've seen where it can go right in the UK. But I'm sure Mark's far more versed in how to avoid these challenges.
Mark, on that point, is there anything you'd like to add?
Not necessarily, but yeah, I'm fully aware of the challenges in that kind of area. There was one thing I wanted to add to what I spoke about before, and that's future proofing. So it may be that as part of a home remodeling, refurbishing, or adding an extension, that the client can't quite stretch to that solar PV installation on their roof. What we can do for just a few £100 is future proof, because what happens is that the builders come in. 3 months later, the builders leave, they repossess their home, loving it, really, really cozy. The last thing they want to do is get the contractors in again in 2-3 years' time, when actually they can afford to fit that solar PV arrangement. What we can do, and what other contractors can do, is offer a future-proofing service where you're just taking all the cables, all the pipes, everything there, terminating, coiling it up into the loft space, coiling it up into the consumer unit cupboard, and just leaving it there until such time that the client can afford it, because then it's really, really easy to retrofit, because everything's already there in place. And just for a few £100, you can future-proof your home for when the budget affords.
Brilliant, thank you, Mark. There's been a couple of comments and questions which I think are really, really important and a bit controversial about class and age differences in understanding and also confidence with putting retrofit measures into their house. Katie, this is something that you kind of touched on in relation to the social aspect of the East model. Can you talk about how we can, I suppose, avoid some parts of society, some groups getting kind of excluded from this, but also kind of welcome everyone into the fold of moving towards a shared goal?
Sure, I loved someone put in the chat about the government should do a campaign that kind of brings people along and makes them understand why we need to make these changes, but also could promote that people can get some of these measures for free. I think a lot of people don't realise if you are eligible for child benefit, then you can access some of these things, like eco. And again, like, people aren't necessarily aware. I think last year there were 12,000 heat pumps installed for free under various government schemes. So it's making people aware that they can access these things, and that they can, and how, because again, it's like, how do I even go about this? And it's making them aware that they can do it. So I do think there's a role for government in promoting this, having a clear campaign and clear next steps of what you can do and how you can actually access some of these things, especially if you do have some eligibility for benefits.
Okay, super helpful. Thank you very much. Wow, there's some really, really good questions, and we're not going to unfortunately get time to ask them all. But someone has asked a really helpful question around how we ensure there is a link between, so Matthew Evans, thank you for this. How do you ensure that there is a link between finance and consumer journey, and that's managed without anyone falling into legal pitfalls or risks? I'm wondering who would be best to answer this. Would anyone in particular like to answer that one?
I'm happy to pick up an element of it. So, in one sense, this kind of comes back to what I was saying earlier about sort of the US example, where you've got to ensure that the people with the right expertise are advising at the right time. So your retrofit assessor is advising on the retrofit and the install, and your financial institution is advising on the finance. Where you start to get into tricky territory, as Chris alluded to, is if you've got a bank trying to advise on retrofitting, because that's not their bread and butter. But the really tricky one is if you get an installer starting to try and advise on finance. Financial advice is a highly regulated activity with incredibly strict guardrails introduced by the FCA, so the Financial Conduct Authority. Now, we do know of a number of financial institutions and installers who have actually got an agreement where the installers have become FCA registered and FCA certified, so they can advise their clients, but that's very rare, and because it is really quite admin intensive, we haven't seen that happen. So typically what we've seen, and Chris, you outlined it when you were talking about NatWest's one-stop shop, is a handover at the right point during the journey, hand over to the financial institution who can advise on the different financing options, and then a hand back to the tradespeople who can then take this forward, making sure people advise at the right time. What we do need to ensure, though, is that people don't drop out the journey. It can be very easy, particularly if you're not got that soft handover to that financial advice. It can be really daunting to suddenly work out, right, where do I find £10,000, £15,000? How do I do this? So having that advice at the right time is critical. And one of the other pieces as well on the finance side is ensuring that there is variety. I spoke earlier just about green mortgages because that's the most advanced of the finance markets for green home improvements, but we're starting to see a whole host of different solutions come forward, from unsecured green home improvement loans, property linked finance, heat as a service, which all of that ensures that you don't have one archetype of customer not everybody's going to want the same type of finance. So as well as making sure that you advise people the right home improvements, you give people choice on the type of finance they want to use, and you can blend it with grants. So I want to say it's complicated, but at the same time, it's just making sure the people with the right expertise give the right advice at the right time.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Emma. I've seen so many helpful comments and questions in the chat. Unfortunately, we're not going to have time to answer them all, but I think that the questions are being collated, and we can have we'll do a follow-up afterwards with the panelists in some capacity. So, and there also will be a chance to we'll send out the contact details, sorry, of the speakers. I did have a slide up which I took away so that you could all see the speakers' faces, but we'll send that out after to all the attendees. So just, I guess, to start summarising, so we heard from Katie, who shared the combi model, which I always find funny because it sounds a bit like a combi boiler, but it was about capability, opportunity, behaviour, and M, which I've forgotten what it stands for.
Motivation.
Right? Motivation. Thank you. And then we talked about and Katie shared about East, which is your kind of solution, making it easy, go on, Katie, remind me remind me the acronym. Easy,
attractive, social, and timely.
Social and timely. I put myself under the spot by trying to repeat that, didn't I? I had actually written it in my notes, but and you talked about things like putting your literature in text that is of a reading age of 8, because that is more accessible. And ultimately, I know from personal experience that it doesn't matter what my reading age is. If something's too long or too complicated, I don't have time to read it. And I think a lot of people really identify with that. Having a clear next step, so encouraging those you work with and providing to consumers that you work with one clear next step is much more effective than having reams and reams of all of the knowledge and all of the insight, because people don't have time for it, unfortunately. Mark talked about doing draft proofing first and loft insulation first, and then thinking about other measures. Chris, you mentioned the grant finder that has been proved really, really popular, and I think for anyone who is working with consumers who may benefit from grants, or indeed themselves is a consumer who may benefit from grants, definitely worth checking that out. And Emma, you've talked a lot about, making sure that consumers can trust the providers, and learning from the negative experiences that have happened elsewhere, so that we, in our transition to net zero, have a positive experience. And ultimately, this is, I guess the reason why we know we need to do this webinar and why we know we need to incentivize consumers is because this is a huge task. Doing tens or hundreds of homes a day is definitely not going to be enough. We need to be moving into the thousands, and the only way to do that is to make people want to retrofit their homes and to move towards more warmer, more sustainable homes. We appreciate that there has been some comments about the language of warmth and coziness, and actually, ultimately what is needed from an environmental perspective is something quite different. So thank you very much for joining us, and thank you to Chris, Katie, Emma, and Mark, and Devinder for your brilliant introduction. I am now going to hand over to Devinder to close and and to talk about next steps. Thank you for joining us today and for being part of this important conversation. And please also do let us know how you get on if you're able to try any of the insights and actions that we've discussed. Thank you.
Well, my sincere thanks to the panelists for their contributions and insights today, and for Anna for doing such a sterling job in terms of chairing a very constructive and a very live conversation. I could just see from the conversation and the comments coming through, we could have easily extended the session into sort of another half hour, if not two. So my thanks to the panelists and the chair, but also to the participants as well. We very much hope that you've kind of gleaned some insights which you can sort of take away and sort of apply in your day-to-day jobs. But ultimately, the constructive challenge that has come back and the feedback, we will be responding to that in due course. In terms of next steps, ultimately we will be sharing the slides. I'm sure Katie will sort of give a thumbs up to that. Thank you, Katie. But also in terms of gleaning your further feedback, we've had great participation with over 150 registrants today, so thank you very much. I'm in the process of bringing together a 2025 Insights and Thought Leadership programme, and as part of that we want to establish a much more credible and a much more timely webinar programme series as well. So your thoughts, your inputs, your ideas as to what that content and structure and the shape of and who you would recommend wanting to sort of speak on these sessions would very much be welcome. So look out for that link shortly after today's session. All that's left for me to say is thank you once again to everybody on this session. Have a wonderful day, and we'll be in touch in due course. Thank you.